Welcome to the Thrive TV Show with Lauren Parsons, helping you boost your health, energy, and productivity.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Thrive TV Show. I'm Lauren Parsons, your host, and today I'm joined by David Downs, who is based in Auckland. Nice to have you here today, David.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so good to connect with you. We were just saying beforehand, I don't know how I haven't already met you, and I'm so thrilled to meet you today. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We're talking about facing the worst. So we're going to chat a bit about resilience, optimism when things go bad, and practices that you can employ to keep your spirits up. So David, before we dive into that, I'd love to just ask you my this and that question. So you're ready for a quick fire round?
Okay, sure. Do I have to think fast, do I? Okay, right.
That's the idea.
Put my brains on. Right.
So tell me, cats or dogs?
Oh, given I've got my dog sitting right next to me, it'll have to be dog. Yeah. I'll get him to come over. Chewy.
Yep. Always bring the dogs into the camera. If you are listening in to the podcast version of this on Spotify or iTunes, you've got to come and see the YouTube version of that Thrive TV show. What breed?
He's a cavoodle.
There is a gorgeous, beautiful caramel coloured cavoodle on screen right now. Oh, very cute. Thank you. Tell me, indoors or outdoors?
Outdoors.
Nice. Chicken or beef?
Ooh, probably chicken actually. Yeah.
Okay. Shower or bath?
Oh, shower, definitely. I hate baths. It feels like you're stewing in some sort of soup. It's horrible.
Okay. Broccoli or carrots?
Oh, broccoli.
Okay. Would you rather be a poet or a scientist?
Oh my gosh. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive, I have to say, because I'd studied science at university and I've written a bit of poetry. But if put a gun to my head, I'd be a poet.
Okay. A month without your car or a month without the internet?
I hardly ever use the car, so you can take it. But I can't live without the internet because it's how I connect with the world, particularly in these lockdowns that we've had over the last year or two.
Yes, absolutely. And last one is dinner with Samuel L. Jackson or dinner with Morgan Freeman?
Oh, can I choose dinner with my wife?
Oh, there you go. You get so many brownie points for that, don't you?
Yeah.
Very nice. Wonderful.
Cool.
So if you haven't met David, he has had an amazingly successful career, both in the private and public sector, with senior roles at organisations like Microsoft, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. He's now the CEO of the New Zealand Story, and he also acts as a consultant and as director on several boards. He's an ex-comedian, TV and radio actor, semi-finalist for New Zealander of the Year, and he's a published author of his books No.8 Re-wired, No.8 Recharged, A Mild Touch of Cancer, and Silver Linings. He co-founded SOS Business, a hugely successful not-for-profit initiative that helps cafes and other small businesses and has helped them during COVID-19. So thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom today. So David, just tell me, can you share a bit of your story with us?
Yeah, I'll give you the very short version because if I talk for too long, I'll take up all your time. But the short version was I was just a normal, working man and started to feel a bit sick, and I thought I had the flu, and finally went to the doctor after much cajoling from my wonderful wife, and discovered I actually had a pretty major cancer issue.
Wow.
And this was about 3 or 4 years ago now, and ended up getting, I'd had cancer for so long, I went straight into hospital, and I was in hospital off and on in New Zealand for about a year, which was just a complete surprise. And then, but ultimately I was told that it wasn't successful. The treatment I was having, the chemotherapy wasn't working, which was a pretty major problem. So I ended up, getting a terminal diagnosis. I was told I had 6 months to a year to live. And, that was a major kind of point for our family after already being a year's worth of treatment. But through amazing luck and the help of others and incredible science, going back to your point about science, I managed to get myself on a clinical trial in the USA, and I went over to Boston and spent about a few months over there, basically on a clinical trial for a new type of cancer therapy at Harvard Medical School. So I was incredibly lucky, and I was, cured basically, and came back to New Zealand a few years ago and sort of thought, wow, this is incredible. So since then, it's, it's completely, changed the trajectory of my life and my outlook on life. And we've worked to get the same treatment here in New Zealand that's now available in New Zealand, which is fantastic. So people don't have to go all the way to Boston like I did.
Right.
Yeah, it's a big breakthrough. But suddenly from being told I was terminal to then suddenly going, you're better, you're cured, no evidence of cancer.
Wow.
Big shifts.
Okay, I mean, I can just imagine from the outside that must have been a massive perspective shift. So can you tell us a bit about what did it actually do to your perspective on life?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been an optimistic person. I'm very, from a child all through my life, I've been optimistic and positive, and but now I'm probably even more so. I talk about this quite a lot with groups about the power of optimism and how it actually creates the future you want. It's not just about being kind of Pollyanna-ish and thinking, oh, isn't it beautiful? It's actually about creating a different type of future. And so I think personally, you can be an optimist or a pessimist, and whichever one you choose, you get good at it when you practice. And when you practice optimism, it becomes like a skill, like a learned skill. It's like you go to the gym and you sort of build your muscles up. Well, you do the same with your attitude.
Totally.
So that to me is that probably the biggest thing is that now I'm very optimistic, constantly looking for what's the best that can possibly happen in this particular scenario. So yeah, that's probably the biggest perspective. The other thing for me is I didn't go back to full-time work for a long time. In fact, even now I'm only part-time in my job. I love the jobs that I do, but I've realized that there's so many more things in life that give you meaning and purpose that you've got to free up the time to do them. So that's probably the other big thing for me.
Okay. So we've got two directions I want to head in. I'm going to jump into this first. Can you tell me, for those that are listening in, how do you say no to all the opportunities that could be in front of you? Because I imagine there could be many. How do you actually bring yourself back to just working part-time then, or to limit those things that you do?
I have this mental picture in my head of a Venn diagram where you get the circles that overlap.
Yes.
And the circles that overlap in my mind there's three of them always. One is this important for the world? Is it useful and important? And the second circle is, have I got the skills to actually do something useful? And the third is, do I like the people? And when it hits all those three, it's useful and important, and I've actually got some skills, and the people I'm going to work with are great. Then I'm in, and that says nothing about the what it is necessarily. So I find myself doing everything I work in the technology sector a lot. I work with other cancer patients a lot. I work in charities. I do this work with the New Zealand Story, which is about branding New Zealand to the world. So it's a real variety of things, but they all hit the middle part of that Venn diagram.
Yeah, I've heard of that diagram as well before, and that finding that sweet spot.
Yeah,
where you've got the thing that you're really good at and that you love doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can find that, and you're really on a journey in life to find that sweet spot, and it starts with learning about yourself. Like a lot of people don't realize that the most important thing is to spend some time really understanding yourself. And when you go through this sort of terminal cancer diagnosis, and I've talked to lots of patients who have this experience, you learn a lot about yourself. Like learn what's important to you and what makes you tick and what your values are. That makes it much easier to make those sorts of decisions, because you're kind of coming from this point of clarity of your own purpose.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of leadership training as well, and so much about great leadership is about great self-awareness. When we start with that self-awareness, then everything comes out of that.
Yeah.
The other direction that I wanted to head in and ask you about was to zone in on optimism, because you talked about that it's something that you practice. So can you give our listeners today some really, practical ways that we can actually boost optimism?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just shut my door anyway.
Yes, your dog's gone out.
Life. I mean, it's a great thing about this lockdown, actually, isn't it? That you kind of like much more in other people's lives, and you see each other as humans instead of just as it's kind of figures or talking heads on a screen. So the optimism thing for me. So I mean, the key one thing to learn about optimism, and actually, if you study the literature. So I'm using the science brain because you said it earlier, science brain. If you study the literature, what you'll discover is that optimism is in part genetic. So, part of how you see the world is you're genetically predisposed. Part of it is circumstance, and part of it is learned skills. But the ratio is nowhere near what most people would think. Most people would think that most of it's to do with your circumstance, and then your genetics, and then a little bit your skills. In fact, it's the other way around. your circumstances play very little part to do in your everyday happiness. So that's why, you know, billionaires can be miserable and people living in poverty can be very happy, because the actual circumstance, and that's not to belittle people who are having real hardship in life, by the way. That's just to say that circumstances have less impact than you think. Genetics also has less impact than you think. You know, it's about, you know, scientifically about 30 to 40% of how you see the world is based on your genetic predisposition, which leaves 30 to 40 to 50%, which is all about learned skills. And that's what's so incredibly powerful when you realize that, and then when you learn how to do it. And it's not like there's a magical thing, by the way. It's purely around practicing optimism. Many of the old wives' tales and sort of wisdom from ancient cultures comes in here. Things like being thankful and grateful, and, you know, taking a moment of sort of gratitude, which has got a bit sort of out there with hippie-ish almost. But actually, when you look at the neuroscience behind it, it's purely about reinforcing the circuits in the brain that are focused on positive things and create dopamine and those sorts of things. So for me, there's lots of practices that you can do. Like, for example, every morning I wake up, before I get up, I think, what's the best thing that's going to happen today? What am I looking forward to?
Nice.
What's the kind of key points I'm really going to relish? And then as the day goes through, you're kind of anticipating and looking forward to stuff. It's like when you book a holiday. I always think, I use that analogy. When you book a holiday, the holiday bit's actually only about 30% of the fun. The fun bit is the planning, the what if, the looking at maps, the kind of working out schedules. Then you go on holiday, and let's be honest, sometimes when you go on holiday, it's not all that much fun. You know, like you've got to find a dry cleaner, or it rains, or you get sunburned, or the food's not as good as you thought, or whatever. But later, when you look back, all that's gone, and you just remember the great bits. So you kind of relish it and kind of bask in it. And so that's the same sort of technique. Just use that same kind of idea in all parts of your life. Is that, okay, I'm really looking forward to today because I'm going to get to talk to Lauren. I've got another talk this afternoon. And then later in the day, when you're reflecting back, you go, I think I did a good job on that. That was actually really enjoyable. I met some cool people. You know, it made me think of something a bit different. So you're kind of constantly reinforcing the positive circuits in your brain.
I love that.
Again, it's like building a muscle. You're just kind of constantly building those muscles.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I often talk about gratitude, and you're right that sometimes people just think it's a bit of a woo-woo idea, but the thing is, the reason we keep hearing about it is because it is scientifically evidence-based. It works. I talk about in the morning casting grateful thoughts back and forth. So similar to what you do, thinking about what was the best thing about yesterday and what's one thing I'm looking forward to today, because we know that it is more likely to happen when we look forward to it. So,
and if people out there are just going, oh, this all sounds a bit woo-woo, then there's some fantastic books out there. I'm going to find, here's one of them. Look, there's two actually. Two book recommendations for your watchers and listeners. One is called Stumbling Up, the How of Happiness. And the other one
Sonia
is
Lamborski, yes.
Yeah, Stumbling on Happiness. And both of them are written by scientists. They're not written by kind of weirdo cults. And it's all about how neuroscience interacts with some of the practices that we've had for a long time, but we're now only discovering how clever they are, you know.
Yes, exactly. Because we know that the brain is plastic, isn't it? It's that neuroplasticity of the brain that if you've had this old thought pattern that's like you've been walking through a field of wheat going this way for all of your life till now, and you're listening right to this right now, you might decide, oh, I do want to be more optimistic. I see other people are more optimistic. You choose to make that change. It's just like walking a new path through that field of wheat, isn't it? And it feels resistance at first, and it might feel uncomfortable, but over time it becomes easier.
It builds it up. It becomes a habit. You know, and unfortunately, it can go the other way too, because you know, you often see people, and I'm sure people will have people, you know people in their lives that are like this, that are constantly focused on the negative or finding difficulty, or you know, you talk to people and you say, you know, how you feeling? Oh, you know, it's going to be terrible today. I'm got a really hard day ahead. And then at the end of the day, oh, it was a tough day. Well, of course it was tough. You expected it to be tough. It will be tough. You know, you expected to be miserable. That's probably what you'll experience. That's not the effective reality around you. In all likelihood, you kind of create your own reality in your head. So yeah, I think there's challenges there. So that's why I think, as I say, whichever one you practice, you get really good at it.
And I think we've got to watch our words, because our words are really powerful. I was talking to a client the other day who runs quite a large company, and most of the staff are in Auckland, and he was just talking about how challenging lockdown was going to be and how awful it was going to be, and I was sort of like, do I say something? And I decided to be courageous and say, well, it will be more awful if you say that it will be, And he was like, oh, yeah, okay, good point, Lauren. And
That's
I wasn't
really
sure
good
if I'd
point.
just broken the relationship, but actually after that, he asked me if I could do some coaching with his whole team. I was like, okay, so I think he needed to hear that.
But I think you're
But
completely right. The power of words is incredible. You know, even the phrase lockdown is actually a pretty crappy word. Like if we replaced that word with something else that was more around community, spirit, you know, we're creating a safe space, but something. But I remember when I was in hospital that, you know, it was one of the key lessons I learned is that the language that you use about yourself and that others use about you creates that. You know, I would be lying, you know, in the first couple of days of being in hospital, I'd never been in hospital in my life. And I knew I was in the beginning of a very long journey in hospital. And people were saying to me, oh, you must be sick and suffering, and you must be, you know, are you uncomfortable? You know, you're a patient, you're sort of battling cancer. And all these sorts of phrases create this sense of victimness in your head.
Yes.
And you kind of allow yourself to feel like that and be a little bit sort of self-absorbed and pitying and we had to break the circuit. I remember Catherine and I, my wife and I, were just going, I can't be like this. I can't be in victim mode for 9 months or 10 months or whatever the hell it's going to be. And we had to change the mindset. And that was a really powerful one. The way I did it was we used to pretend I was going on holiday. So instead of going to hospital, I'd say, well, I'm going on holiday next week, you know, and we'd pack my holiday bag and I'd bring some props and costumes and posters for the walls and all that sort of stuff. And just change the mindset. Instead of then dreading what was coming, you'd actually genuinely get to the point where you go, oh, this is going to be quite cool. Like I'm going to be in Paris next week. Like, you know, I'm pretending I'm going to get everyone to dress up. I'm going to make the nurses laugh, you know. So it's always about how you can change the words around you as well.
Absolutely. That's powerful. Yeah. So tell me a bit about what were the keys for you going through that period of time in terms of resilience, and what are your keys to listeners in terms of building our resilience?
Yeah, I mean, resilience is built, you know, one step at a time. I've got this sort of, again, this mental picture of resilience because I've thought about it a lot. There's some people who would consider that resilience as being sort of really stoic and strong and facing up to everything. And you know, and there's the image of a lighthouse. This is the kind of one image, you know, a lighthouse, and there's a storm's coming and it batters against it, but nothing breaks it. I think that's a terrible metaphor. And another metaphor that I also think is bad is the image of kind of a non-stick fry pan, because there are other people who just go, oh, I don't care, like I don't, you know, I'm not noticing, I don't care a thing. And again, I think that's a terrible metaphor. The better metaphor for resilience is the idea that actually you acknowledge that you're a human being. You know, we are emotional people. Things will have an impact on you. You're allowed to feel at times down or sad or you know, impacted, but you should realize that in time you're also going to come back. You're going to, and it's I use the metaphor of a memory foam pillow. You know, a pillow on bed. You put your head on it and it makes a dent, and you take your head off. The dent's still there for a while, but over time it comes back. You know, and it comes back to pretty much where it was before. That's real resilience. It's not about ignoring the dent or pretending that you're not feeling bad. It's about realizing that you will get back, and you can build those steps back more quickly when you realize that, because you're not wallowing in self-pity.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I was picturing like a root of bamboo that, you know, that it actually bends and then it sways back. But actually the definition for resilience for an object is being able to spring back into its original shape. And often when I speak on resilience, I share that. And although I know it's not about humans, I actually think it is. It's a great analogy, because yes, we have to acknowledge how we're feeling. But over time, acknowledge that we will feel better when, you know, feelings come and go, and that things will get better.
And again, for those out there who are interested more in the science, and I'm, you know, like I said earlier, I'm actually quite a sciencey person. I did science at university. If you're interested in this stuff, there's actually a lot of good wisdom here about how this works. It's again it's not all this crazy woo-woo stuff. It is actually proven that, you know, humans will have got a sort of a point they will usually come back to. You know, whatever the tragedy in your life, you're likely to come back to a natural set point. And as say, you can influence where that is by, you know, through practices. But, you know, if you win lotto, you'll be incredibly happy for a period of time, but you'll actually come back to a set point. And similarly, when a loved one dies or you go through some sort of tragedy, you'll feel very low for a while, but you're likely to come back to a similar sort of set point if you do nothing else. And that's a really powerful, you know, and proven concept. So the point is now, how do you make that set point move? Not how do you avoid the highs and lows, because that's just life.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So you're going to share with us some of the practices that you use and perhaps that others can emulate to keep your spirits up. What was it that you did? I know you shared pretending that you're going on holiday.
Yeah.
Are there other things that you did that really kept your spirits up?
It's anticipation and gratitude are probably the biggest two that we talked about earlier. I always talk about the fact that when you know that old wives' tale or old sort of story about when you chop wood, it warms you twice. It warms you when you chop it, and it warms you when you burn it. Well, if you do anticipation and gratitude, you'll get 3 times the burning. You'll get it beforehand, and then when something happens that's good, and then when you reflect on it later. So that's a key one. The other big thing I always think of is how do I make it? How do I change this perspective of me having to be happy as my kind of set point to actually how do I create a better kind of community around me? And I know that sounds a bit loose, but if you just step back, happiness is actually a very transient and not a great kind of ambition, because happiness is actually pretty one-dimensional. You're either happy or not. And even though these books, when they get into it, when they talk about happiness, what they talk about is purpose is much more meaningful than happiness.
Yeah.
And quite often when you can see purpose in what you're doing, even if you're not necessarily ecstatically happy about it, you'll get a much more defined set of, self-worth and relief. And for me, finding a purpose that is not about me is important, so if I wanted to just be happy, I would just live a really, crazy life. I'd, drink a lot and go out all the time and, buy lots of things. But actually, as you get older in life, that none of that's real. What really matters is how do you make life better for everybody else around you? How do you find your sense of purpose? So that's probably the key thing is, again, when you learn yourself well enough to understand what really makes you tick, leaning into purpose and living that purpose every day. I mean, I spend a lot of time with other cancer patients, for example, now, and it doesn't always make me happy. In fact, quite often it doesn't, because it doesn't always go well. But that's how I get my sense of purpose, by attempting to, and sometimes helping other people going on their journeys through cancer. But again, if it's like high sugar foods, eat high sugar foods, you'll feel great for a few seconds, and then you won't feel good at all. Versus really good food that's healthy and nutritious. It's kind of, you've got to look for that stuff in your mental life as well.
Yeah, and I think that sense of purpose, it's about creating not just the superficial happiness, but this deep sense of contentment and joy, isn't it? And I think of Martin Seligman, who's often referred to as the founding father of positive psychology, which is essentially what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so if listeners aren't familiar, go and listen to Martin Seligman talk about his PERMA model, and the P of that model is purpose, having that sense of purpose in what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think people find that? I know I'm asking you really tough questions, but I'm just picturing that if I was listening in, I'd be thinking, this is great, David. I want to be more resilient. I want to be more optimistic. I want to have that sense of purpose.
Yeah.
What are ways that you find purpose, or how do you recommend people tap into
Well, for me, I mean, I'm lucky. I'll say lucky, actually. I was lucky because facing cancer or a terminal diagnosis or a tragedy or whatever in life is a great way to help you really refine what's important to you and which is your purpose. So for me, that was my path. I was probably already on that path anyway. I mean, it felt like, for years I've been, like everybody, as you get older, you start to realize there's a bit more to life than just, so I was on that. But there are, if people out there are going, what is my purpose? Ask other people what they think of you that you think is important, and then start to go, do I like that or not? Start benchmarking yourself. If you talk to your friends and you say, what do you think that I think is important in life? And if they say, oh, having fun and going out drinking and blah, 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 and that doesn't resonate with you, then that's not what you're projecting. Then there's something wrong, kind of an imbalance. And it's about, I don't think there's a magic formula to it, although there's lots of good tools online for, finding value and meaning and working out what your personal values are, et cetera, et cetera. Working with a great coach can help you really sort of dig in. But fundamentally, it's about asking yourself really deep questions and not being afraid of the answer, and not trying to hide behind the fact that might scare you when you find it. But it's a worthwhile exercise, whatever you do, because you'll enrich yourself. You'll learn more about yourself.
Yeah, and it comes back to that self-awareness, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Tell
just a
me
shame
about,
that like some people get that much earlier in life than others. You know, you can see some people who are very self-aware very early in life, and others it takes, they never get there, or it takes, you know, a long time. But it really is a breakthrough when you find it and you realize that actually I'm in harmony, you know, things are in harmony. I remember when I was at school, I went to a Catholic boys' school. I'm not Catholic anymore, but I remember one particular lesson, one of the teachers said that, you know, it was the kind of religious studies, but it was actually really, this guy was great. He was a philosopher and a psychologist, and he said, you've actually really only got two jobs in life. One is to work out what your personal value system is, and the second is to live it.
yeah.
And he was telling that to like 15-year-old boys at a high school. But man, that stuck with me my whole life. Like, what a really powerful way to think. It wasn't do unto others as you do unto yourself, blah, 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 all those kind of really religiously top-down things. It was much more find out what your value system is and then live it. And when you're doing that, you're kind of in harmony. It's like, wow, that's powerful.
It is. It's interesting, isn't it, when you reflect back on some of those profound things that have stuck with you. Yeah, very good. So you said one key is choosing how you want the day to be, or how you want the week to be, what you're looking forward to. Another key is reflecting back on it. And I think of Sean Aker, who talks about this, who says that, you know, recapping your highlight from the day. This is something we do around the dinner table. We share what was the best thing about your day, and no one's allowed to get down from the table unless they've shared what it was and asked someone else.
Cool.
And and so recapping that, it actually doubles your happiness factor, because your brain doesn't distinguish between that great thing happening and then you just replaying it. So the more that we practice these sorts of things, the more that we train ourselves to be resilient and optimistic. Yeah,
exactly. It's and another stat that I heard, again, scientifically proven, is that it takes work, but you've got to acknowledge that it's not natural. If you see people who are naturally optimistic, it's because inside their head they're actually working on it. They might not even realize it. And it takes something like 3 positive experiences to outweigh 1 bad one, or something, you know. You probably know more about this than I do, Laura, but and so you're constantly having to, you know, needing to find those positive things so that you don't allow yourself to slip backwards. It's pretty hard, and things like these sort of lockdowns we've been having, even the most optimistic people will find them challenging, because you're if you're not concerned about yourself, you're probably concerned about other people and society and what's going on, and you're feeling bad. And so you've got to kind of, this is even work harder during these periods to make sure that you're focused on the things that you can control, that you've got some sort of sense of agency over, because that's important. Then you're not a victim, you're a participant. And keep up those practices when you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really like that. And I think, again, people watching this, it'll be obviously in the post-COVID era. Whenever you're listening into this, these things are relevant for any time. And life is always uncertain to a certain extent, and we always get to choose to focus on what's within our control. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing I've thought of, because I've certainly found it a roller coaster here. I teach about resilience, and yet I've, you know, gone through the roller coaster of emotions as well. And that's just part of being human.
Good on you. Yeah.
So tell me a bit about when you were writing the book. What was that process like? But your most recent book, I think you've got
cool. Let me show you
copy.
Do
a bit of show and tell. A mild touch of not just man flu, but the cancer.
Yeah, well, the idea was that when I first got diagnosed, I thought I had the flu, and I started going, it's just the flu. I was typical male, you know, ignoring my symptoms. And so what happened was, actually, the reason I wrote this book is I actually started writing it the day I got diagnosed. I was in hospital. I was in, with the doctors, actually, and had my laptop because I was supposed to be going to work. And I thought, oh God, sitting in the waiting room, waiting, feeling all very entitled. And I got my laptop out and started just writing about what I was feeling and the emotions and the experience. And I kind of constructed a blog, and I sent it off to staff of the newspaper and said, I've just been diagnosed with cancer. I think it's going to be a while. Maybe I'll write a column every week about what it's like, because I'm going to learn a lot. And so that's what I did. And they published it every week. And that became this book. I thought I would write maybe, 10, 15. I ended up writing 60 for a year and a half, every week, whether I felt like it or not, no matter how. Sometimes I'm so glad I did, because it's in real time. So sometimes they're great, they're really funny, and, because I'm used to be, writing funny. Other times it's pretty stark, because I'm going, shit, I just found out I've been, that's it. I'm out of options. So never quite knew how the book would end. So in fact, writing the part of the book, I go, I'm writing this, I'm going to turn it into a book, and I'm jealous of you, the reader, because you can turn to the last page and find out what happened, but I've got to live the next 6 months or 12 months or whatever it's going to be. Yeah, so that was the process, but it became a really cathartic thing because it externalized a lot of the thoughts and allowed me to, see things much more objectively. So, I'd be going through a really terrible procedure, like, a lumbar puncture, where they'd literally stick a big thing in your back to get spinal fluid out, and excruciating pain. And then Catherine leaned over and went, "This will be good for the blog." It's like, I go, yeah, it's like changing mindset. It's like, oh, you're right.
Yeah,
this is great. I mean, yeah.
Which
now I'm going. I'm
it's
relishing.
adding a sense of purpose, right? It's adding this whole extra layer of purpose to what you're doing. Yeah.
Exactly. And we didn't necessarily realize we were doing that at the time, although later we sort of realized and we started doing it more. But that sort of thing of reframing something, instead of being a victim of this, I was actually going, oh, now my job is to be a really good participant so I can report on it to help other people know what to expect, blah, blah, blah. So it sort of changes that purpose. Yeah.
Wow. And so your children were teenagers during that time?
My children, yeah. At the time, sort of all three of them were teenagers, yeah. And so in the book, I talk about them quite a bit because obviously they're a big part of the story.
Yeah.
And it was funny enough, one of my kids, and this is a true story, he changed on my phone, he changed the autocorrect so that when we wrote their names, it changed their names to superhero names. So write Jack, and as soon as you press space, it would change it to Superman. And so he did that on my phone and Catherine's phone and stuff. And so, and we didn't know how to change it back because we're old. So we just left it like that. So all through the book, we kept them as Jack, as Superman and Batman and the Green Lantern. It's so funny because even the teachers at school got to know that. We would say, we would text them, Jack's going to be late for school, but they would get Superman's going to be late for school. Yeah, so it's very cool.
Yeah, nice. So how did I just love that. And sorry to bring it on more of a somber note, but I'm just thinking, how did your kids deal with it, and how did you deal with communicating with your kids about the whole poster?
At the time, it was amazing, and it still is, but at the time, the three boys, they were really supportive of their mother. They were like, and we tried to be very honest with them, but not overly catastrophizing. We would tell exactly what we knew, but we wouldn't labor it. So they knew what was going on. There were times where it wasn't easy to talk about the thoughts of things, but we'd also try and keep our spirits up as a family and be focused on the future. And, particularly as we thought there was an option for me to go to the US and things like that, it became very kind of positive. So they were really good. Afterwards, the doctor said to me that, your family is highly likely, you've been through a really traumatic period of your life. You're going to get into some post-traumatic stress situations. And that's been true. It's been harder after, as we all reflect back on, and there's certain things that really, trigger a couple of the boys, when they hear me talk about things, or when I'm talking to other patients and stuff, and they can find that hard. So we're still working through it. It didn't really go away. Just being honest, and harder for the younger one in particular. But it's also, again, talking about resilience, it's made us much more resilient as a family. We're really tight knit. The boys are very supportive of their mother through that period. And and I look back at my whole cancer and I go, and I'm quite honest, I wouldn't want to do it again. And I definitely regret the impact it had on others, but for me personally, I wouldn't change it. You know,
of course.
Isn't that crazy? Because at the time it was awful. But I look back now and go, man, that was you've got, and again, it's about how you frame it, but it was a gift to be able to go through that and get to where I am now. But I do regret the impact it had for others rather than me.
That's really touching. But I think it makes me think as well of, currently as we're recording this, Auckland is in lockdown, and it's been the fourth one for you guys, which I do really feel for you. And it's been really tough for so many people. And at the same time, we know that it's the most challenging times in our life that are the most resilience building. That's when we stretch and when we grow. And I think it's that good opportunity now to cast your mind forward to think in a year from now, when you look back at this period, what will you have learned? And so I guess that's the one thing to perhaps be hopeful about, is to think, what can we be learning right now?
Exactly. And what you just said is really important too. There's a couple of things if people can just hold on to. One is that in the same way that when you don't get fit by sitting around, you get fit by going to the gym, by stretching muscles, by pushing your body a bit further. Same sort of thing. Like if you're finding it tough, just reframe it as, actually, I'm exercising my emotional muscles, and that will be great for me in the long run. And then don't let yourself kind of get too stuck in that despair, because yes, it's natural to feel bad and awful, and give yourself, I call it a sort of a good recreational cry, but then you get yourself back up again, and again, all this old wisdom comes back, pick yourself back up and keep going. Isn't about stoicism, it's actually about resilience. It's about how do you kind of just make sure that you find yourself back in that positive zone again.
Yes, because being resilient isn't about being tough, because then you'll just snap. It's about actually being adaptable and being bendable.
That's right. Yeah.
So good. Oh, David, I just love talking to you. I'm just so thrilled. I'm so pleased that you've had such an amazing outcome from your treatment, and great to hear that that's available here in New Zealand. It's just, I can just tell in the short time we spent together that you're just an amazing human being. So thank you for everything that you do in the world, and thank you for sharing your story. I can imagine that it was very cathartic, but also very challenging to do that blog and to publish that book. So if people wanted to find out more or follow you or grab a copy for themselves with someone else, you
can Google me. Definitely, you'll find me, and you'll find the book online, Mild Touch. The other thing you'll find online, and this is particularly for cancer patients, when I was sick, I used to get in this, I made a joke about, using my cancer to get out of doing things. It can become like a family joke of like, I can't help with it, I've got cancer or whatever. And then my kids called it Dad's playing the cancer card. And so actually my friends and I made these set of these cancer cards. So if you want one of these, get in touch with me, and I've got these cancer cards, and basically, if you're going through the cancer, it kind of makes a joke of it, going, hey, I'm playing my cancer card. I'm not feeling great.
I'm not taking the rubbish out. I'm not doing the dishes.
Exactly. So if you Google me, you'll find a website. You can grab one of those and please share it around.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, this reminds me of my own tiny example. I was like, oh, I've had the vaccine. My arm's sore. My arm is a bit sore. Like, I don't think I can do the dishes. But I like that. That's much more poignant and appropriate. Yeah, very good. So, David, just as we wrap up, if there's one final thing you'd like to share with everyone listening in, what would it be?
Realize that everybody has their own journey through positivity or resilience or trying to find their own purpose and meaning in life. If people look like they've got their shit together, they probably haven't. They just may be a little bit further on in the journey, but it is a process that you can get yourself into habit on as well. So, ask for help if you need it. Some people need that help, that's great, but realize that actually everybody's on that same journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for your openness and authenticity just to share your story. I really appreciate it, David.
Cool. Ka kite anō.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for tuning in. That's been another episode of the Thrive TV show. Go out and thrive.
Thank you for listening to the Thrive TV show with Lauren Parsons. Visit thrivetvshow.com to access the show notes and discover our fantastic bonus content. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring episode.